I'm back.
I'm shocked.
What's up, Crackle Addicts? I'm Lupinefiasco. This is Daily Fab Gameplay, and today I want to review the changes I made to my Aurora list in anticipation of Pro Tour London. I have a tournament report coming out within the next few days. My Pro Tour success was, marginal, 4-4, though 3-2 in Classic Constructed. My calling results were a little bit better, 7-2 going into day one, ending day one, and then sadly 1-3 drop on day two. But overall, sporting about a 60% win rate with this deck list, and especially coming number 23 out of 900 plus calling competitors on day one makes me feel like I was really onto something here. So I'm going to review the changes and talk about maybe where I went a little different compared to some other Aurora deck lists. I'm talking mainly about Andrea Mengucci's second place calling London Aurora. Give some thoughts on maybe how we're addressing the meta and maybe where we can take the deck post Enigma and Zen. Was hoping to put the tournament report out first, but we're in sort of a time crunch here with ProQuest season starting this weekend. I wanted to get you all up to date with where I am with Aurora and kind of get my thoughts on the deck. So if you do want to view this deck on Fabory, there is a link in the video description below. You can also find links to my Blue Sky, my Discord, and my Patreon. And patrons of the Arc Lightning tier or higher get the matchup guides for this deck. There's a matchup guide for every hero. Some heroes have matchup notes. I'm working to get those filled out. But if you are a little curious about how to board in specific matchups, especially considering all of the 2-ofs in this list, then I recommend you head over to Patreon and subscribe at Arc Lightning or higher. But let's get right into it with the changes from my ProQuest winning Aurora list. I've updated the list here with my most recent changes, and I'm going to go through the versions tab where I can look at all of the changes card by card, kind of tell you specifically what I was looking at, why certain changes were made. As you can see, there isn't anything too substantial, certainly not compared to previous changes, swapping out 11 cards with the introduction of the Armory deck. Here we only have 5 cards, 7 cards being swapped out, and all kind of negligible. So for Pro Tour London, let's look at the cuts I made, starting with Shock Frock. It's just kind of medium, does the thing. A lot of the time, Fiandal Spring Tunic is going to be better. If you want to gain resources over the course of the game, we're looking at heroes like Enigma, who can make games last 9, 10, maybe upwards of 12 turns, in which case you're getting multiple Tunic triggers, Tunic activations, compared to the one you get from Shock Frock. If you need to play more defense, you have Dyadic Carapace. It just is very rare that you ever want your Tunic, but don't anticipate the game going 6 turns long. And that front-loaded armor block is good, but ultimately just not enough to warrant a spot in 80. We have a lot of heroes in the current meta that we need to contend with, and that means that space in the deck is tight. So Shock Frock is just a little too medium at everything it does. It's a nice combination of Dyadic Carapace and Fiandal Spring Tunic, but ultimately doesn't do well enough at either of those jobs to warrant replacing either of those pieces of equipment, and doesn't do well enough at what it does to warrant its own slot. So we are cutting Shock Frock. Next up, we've got Arcanic Shockwave. I love this card. There's nothing wrong with it. I think the front-loaded arcane damage is more important than the back-loaded arcane damage of Static Shock. Shockwave has some really neat combos with Channel Lightning Valley, specifically that you can play Arcanic Shockwave, fuse it with Channel Lightning Valley, then respond to your own Shockwave play by playing the Channel Lightning Valley allowing you to potentially draw a card once the arcane damage resolves. But it is a 0 for 4. It doesn't have Go Again. If you don't have a lightning card in hand, then it is just 0 for 4. It's a good card, but the reason I'm cutting it is that I am also cutting a single copy of Lightning Surge and Second Strike. So the fact that I'm going down on lightning cards means that Arcanic Shockwave gets a little bit worse, and compared to maybe some other cards I wanted to bring in, something like Scar for a Scar, which we'll look at very soon, Static Shock, which plays much better on Arc Lightning turns that started with Lightning Surge or that were enabled with Electrostatic Discharge or Lightning Press. We just have Shockwave getting a little bit worse, enough worse that we can cut a single copy. Speaking of Lightning Surge and Second Strike, sort of the same reason here. We are just looking to make some pretty marginal changes, cut certain attacks and replace them with attacks that are slightly better. The reason we want to go to 2 Lightning Surges is that it does not have natural Go Again. It does have Go Again when played from Arsenal, which makes it very, very good. But anytime you're drawing 2 of these in a hand, you probably aren't very happy with it. It doesn't have Go Again, it blocks for 2, it pitches for 1. Ultimately, when it isn't doing the thing from Arsenal, it just isn't good enough and can be a hindrance, especially when you're drawing 2. Same reason that we are cutting a single copy of Second Strike. Great card, good turn extender when you have dealt damage, but if you're holding 2 of these, they don't have Go Again, they only attack for 3 naturally, so if you cannot turn on the Second Strike text by playing a 0 for 4 Go Again, that gets over the top of 3 block, or pitching to Grasp of the Arknight to send a rune chant that connects, then Second Strike gets a little bit worse, and as players are learning better how to deal with Aurora, block certain attacks, prevent arcane damage early, you just wind up with this card that attacks for 3, blocks for 2, pitches for 1, and often isn't doing the thing. So when you do draw 2 of these and you aren't able to do the thing, they're really bad, we're going to cut a single copy and just make some space. Cutting 3 copies of Sink Below, and this is probably the most substantial change in the Pro Tour London deck. I was a big advocate in ProQuest Road to National Season for playing 9D Reacts. I think that took a lot of people by surprise, and that started to crop up in other events. Calling Sao Paulo was won by Aurora playing 9 defense reactions. We saw Andrea Mangucci come in second in Calling London playing 9 defense reactions. And I don't think that I was really original in pioneering that, but I might have brought it to the forefront. So why did I decide to go down to 6 copies of 4-block defense reactions? The answer, quite simply, is that we needed to cut something to make room for Enigma Tech. We can jump ahead and look at the fact that we are playing 2 copies of Command and Conquer, 2 copies of Scar for a Scar, and 1 copy of Static Shock. So when we are looking at cutting Sink Below, the reason is that we needed to make room for Command and Conquer. And the reason we needed to add Command and Conquer is so that we could have Poppers for Prism, Poppers for Enigma, and Arsenal Destruction for Enigma that cannot be defended by defense reactions, which Enigmas very often hold for your chain-ending snatch. Sink Below felt like the worst of it and Shelter from the Storm, in my opinion, keeping in mind that is not at all a fiscally responsible decision. If you did want to play this Pro Tour London list and wanted to go down to 6 defense reactions, certainly don't run out and spend $300 on a playset of Shelter, but I do think that if you have the Shelter from the Storm, it is marginally better in the current meta than Sink Below is, being able to effectively turn a red into 3 instances of Arcane Barrier. It can be very good against enemy Auroras. It can absolutely shut down Syndra, but the important thing is that you are playing 6 defense reactions because you want to be able to successfully board out your Sigil of Sufferings and your burn-up shocks against Enigma. At least that was my idea going into Pro Tour London. Sigil of Suffering, certainly, I know some people were testing with playing that into Enigma and punishing the 0-card tunic activation Manifestation of Mirgai attack, or against Reality Refractor, being able to block out the tunic Spectral Shield, and because your opponent can't pay for Arcane Barrier 1, they just lose their thing. But that would be a reason to run Burn Up Shock, as your opponent makes the greedy Mirgai play and you just shock them and destroy Mirgai. But the issue I was having with that is Enigmas had gotten better to the point that they weren't falling into that trap. They were correctly playing around one instance of arcane damage, be it Sigil of Suffering or Burn Up Shock. We saw this in Calling Sao Paulo, as every copy of Sigil of Suffering that came up in that finals was absolutely just terrible. Could not get any value out of it. So I wanted to cut the shocks, which meant that I needed to add in the Command and Conquers, which destroy the defense reactions in Arsenal, make blocking it very difficult for Enigma, and can even pop Phantasmaclasm and Miraging Metamorph. So something had to go. I felt like between defense reactions 7 through 9 and blues 4 through 6, the defense reactions were the less important piece, and so I did decide to cut those. We can go into what I added to the deck. I'll start very quickly with Command and Conquer, just because I have just been talking about it. It's a popper for Prism, it's a popper for Enigma, and it destroys defense reactions in Enigma's arsenal. It can't be blocked by defense reactions. It can make things for Enigma very difficult. Those are the only two matchups in which I am bringing Command and Conquer into the deck. This is not here to pick on enemy aggro heroes. This is here specifically for illusionists, and that might end up being replaced by something like Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath, which is really good at punishing illusionists. We're about to lose Enigma, so being able to disrupt our arsenal, make blocking difficult with Command and Conquer is a lot less important. It is not important at all, and if we're looking at bringing poppers into Prism, then we don't want 6 power poppers. We want 7 power poppers, and as a Runeblade, we can bring in 9 power poppers. But that's why Command and Conquer is here. I wanted something for Enigma, more or less specifically, and it also happened to have play into Prism. I did have relatively good success with Command and Conquer in the Calling, which we'll get into later this week. Also had really great success with Lightning Greaves. This is tech that everyone's known about for a long time. It has AB1, it blocks 1. That's the reason we're bringing Lightning Greaves in for PT London, basically specifically to deal with enemy Auroras. Aurora was far and away the most represented deck in London. 33% of the Pro Tour was Aurora. I don't know what the calling percent was, but I'm sure it was the most represented deck. As I have grown as an Aurora player over the last 2 months and really settled into the hunted meta, being able to pay into Arcane Barrier 1 against opposing Aurora, Channel Lightning Valley, Sigil of Suffering plays is the most important thing you can do in the matchup. It is far and away critical to winning an Aurora mirror. If your opposing Aurora is on AB0 and you're on AB1, you should feel fantastic about your position in the game, because they cannot easily deal with Channel Lightning Valley, Sigil of Suffering. If your opponent is bringing Dyadic Carapace into the matchup, you should also feel great, because either they have to pitch 2 reds into AB2 to prevent 1 point of arcane damage on your Sigil of Suffering, or they have to pitch a yellow to pay for AB2, and Aurora's yellows are among her best cards. We're talking Arc Lightning, Channel Lightning Valley, even Skyward Serenade is very, very good. Or they're pitching a blue, and if your enemy Aurora is pitching a blue, it means that they are playing blues in their deck against you, which, great, absolutely. I hope they all show up with Ravenous Rabble or in pairs. So that's why Lightning Greaves is here. It also has fringe uses into Kano and Vincent. It blocks against Prism and Dorinthia, but for the most part, 95% of the time that you will use Lightning Greaves, is in the Aurora mirror, and it is very, very helpful. Zap Clappers is not a card that I was really a proponent of. I think I've talked about on the channel how much I don't like Zap Clappers, or at least didn't like Zap Clappers. And this actually showed up in the lobby of the Doubletree in XL London during people just playtesting and walking around and scouting what other Auroras were doing. And Zap Clappers was on a lot of tables. And Zap Clappers is very obvious in what it does, what the use case is. You have Channel Lightning Valley on the board, you block with Zap Clappers, you reveal an instant from hand, you shoot your opponent for 1 arcane, Channel Lightning Valley triggers, you draw a card on your opponent's turn, you turn your Channel Lightning Valley from effectively 2 cards into 3 cards, and is really, really strong. Against enemy Auroras, this is a little less impactful. As I said, many Auroras are bringing AB1. At this point, we're all conditioned to play around something like this with Channel Lightning Valley, but where Zap Clappers really shines, you still play it in the mirror because you force your opponent to either have Vandal Spring Tunic available or keep a card in hand, which they have to pitch into AB1. Where Zap Clappers really shines is against other aggro decks, non-Aurora aggro decks. Heroes like Zen, Arachne Slip Through the Cracks, Arachne Marionette, Syndra, KO. Heroes that don't play Spring Tunic, and maybe even heroes that don't play AB1. And if you get to block with Zap Clappers, reveal an instant, shoot them, draw a card from Channel Lightning Valley, you're massively ahead. Clappers is really your Sigil of Suffering, but it lives on the board and just gets you value. It also blocks 2. It means that your opponent can never safely go to 1 against you because then you just clap them and they die. Where we have to know something about Zap Clappers, it's important that we acknowledge this. So I talked earlier about the ability to play Arcanic Shockwave, fuse it with Channel Lightning Valley, then respond to the fuse effect of Arcanic Shockwave by playing Channel Lightning Valley to draw a card. You cannot do that with Zap Clappers. You cannot block with Zap Clappers, reveal Channel Lightning Valley, then play Channel Lightning Valley and draw a card from it. The reason for that is that revealing Channel Lightning Valley is part of the Clapper's ability. Revealing any instant is part of the Clapper's ability. So once you start the Zap Clappers effect, it must finish before you as the player get priority. So there is no window in which to reveal Channel Lightning Valley, then play it before it deals damage. You reveal the instant, Zap Clappers deals damage, then you get priority. So you do need to have Channel Lightning on the board before you block with Zap Clappers, but after your single Channel Lightning Valley is on the board, we have 14 other instants in our deck that we can reveal to Zap Clappers. Another Channel Lightning Valley, Electrostatic Discharge, Lightning Press, Electromagnetic Somersault, and Shock on your burn-up shocks. So very easy to trigger the effect of Zap Clappers. I got some good use out of it during the calling. I really enjoyed the way it was working in testing. I had teammates tell me, hey, Clappers is the truth. So I put it into the deck and I really, really enjoyed it. Scar for a Scar is a card that I've gone back and forth on. This was in my Road to Nationals winning list. I cut it because it blocks for 2, it doesn't have natural go again, it isn't a lightning card for fusing, but over the course of testing for PT London, I just came to the conclusion that I didn't have enough go again in my deck. There were too many clunky hands that didn't do anything, unless I really jumped through some hoops, or had an embodiment of lightning set up, or maybe had arc lightning in arsenal. And putting Scar for a Scar back into the deck is just a way to combat that. We get some conditional go again, but if you're playing in the Aurora mirror and maybe you aren't doing so well, or you've strategically allowed yourself to go below life, then Scar for a Scar gets go again. It is really good. So I did enjoy Scar in PT London. I got some good use out of it, where I would not have gotten use out of Lightning Surge or Second Strike. So I am happy to have Scar back in the list. That said, it is only a 2-of, for the same reason that Lightning Surge and Second Strike are 2-ofs, where if you have 2 of these in your hand, and the condition is not met, then it really is just kind of bad. So we're back on 2 scars. Finally, we are back on 1 copy of Static Shock. It blocks 3, it costs 0, it attacks for 4, it has an effect. You can kind of juggle between Arcanic Shockwave and Static Shock based on your own personal preferences. They are mostly the same card, being a 0 for 4, that is conditionally a 0 for 5. The difference between the two is that Static Shock plays much better when you either already have an arsenal or are not planning to arsenal anything. So a turn cycle like Lightning Surge from Arsenal for 4 go again into Static Shock is much better than a turn cycle of Lightning Surge from Arsenal into Arcanic Shockwave if you have no hand or no lightning cards in your hand to fuse. Static Shock is also a 0 for 5 at the end of an Arc Lightning turn, where Arcanic Shockwave might be a 0 for 5 at the start of an Arc Lightning turn, but your opponent can interact with it a little more easily. I think in a vacuum, Arcanic Shockwave is a better card than Static Shock, but as we start cutting lightning cards from our deck, or are maybe more focused on putting these big explosive turns together, Static Shock becomes easier to get value out of compared to Arcanic Shockwave, which says that you either need an Arc Lightning to give it go again, or an Embodiment of Lightning to give it go again, or you are committing yourself to putting a card into Arsenal because the Shockwave doesn't have an action point, doesn't have go again to refund your action point to let you keep going with your turn. I think it's a nice mix of cards. You don't necessarily need to do a 2-1 split, but that is what I decided to do. So this is the full deck. As you can see, we've got 2 copies of Arcanic Shockwave, we have 1 copy of Static Shock, 2 copies of Lightning Surge, 2 copies of Scar for a Scar, 2 copies of Second Strike, still on 3 copies of Flittering Charge, Entwined Lightning, Ravenous Rabble, gone in a flash. Another little side benefit of having all of these 2 ofs and even this 1 of Static Shock is it makes you a little more resilient to Bonds of Agony. If your opponent hits you with the Bonds of Agony trigger and you show them a Static Shock in hand, they might think that by taking that, because you haven't already played one, that they're going to get 3 cards from your deck rather than 1 or 2. Surprise, you only have 1 copy of Static Shock. If they see your Scar for a Scar and they take that, they only get 2 cards from your deck. So it's a little bit of fatigue protection. That isn't a reason to play 2 of. That isn't the primary reason that I'm playing so many 2 ofs. It's more that, well, I don't want 2 copies of Lightning Surge in my hand. I don't want 2 copies of Second Strike in my hand, or Arcanic Shockwave, Static Shock, Scar for a Scar. But it is just this little fringe benefit of having so many 2 ofs. Take a quick look at the sideboard as well. We've got our 2 copies of Command and Conquer. You don't really ever want to see 2 of these in the same hand at the same time. We only want to bring it in against Illusionist, where we are either using it as a popper or playing 9 yellows and 6 blues in our deck. Well, I suppose even more than 9 yellows, 11 yellows and 6 blues in our deck. We have Balance of Justice, really good against Aurora, the Mechanologists, the Brutes, Spring Tunic, great in long games, great in the Aurora Mirror, Greaves, great in the Aurora Mirror, good for blocking, Shock Charmers, just that easy 1-of answer against Wizard, and Zap Clappers for the aggro mirrors, especially the aggro mirrors where they don't have Spring Tunic and maybe don't even have AB1. Finally, we have our maybe board here. This is everything I was testing with for Pro Tour London. Some of this didn't even see the light of testing. Cards like Spellfray Tiara. I did try to mess around with Vaporize Shock for a while. Something like Warmonger's Diplomacy would have been helpful in a particular Azalea game I played. What is not here, what I will look for very quickly to show you, is Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath. I did mention this as a replacement for Command and Conquer, and I think it is something I'm going to experiment with once Enigma finally leaves the format. This card is obviously unplayable as Aurora. You cannot cast this unless you get to the end of the game, and your deck is just blues and Ninth Blade of the Blood Oath. What this does is it is the most super popper for Prism that Aurora could possibly have. It attacks for 9, which means that not only does it pop Herald of Triumph, It pops Herald of Triumph plus Figment of Triumph. It pops Herald of Triumph plus Celestial Reprimand. It does not pop Herald of Triumph plus Reprimand plus Figment of Triumph, but if your opponent is going to such lengths to hit with their Herald of Triumph, you know what? You got your money's worth from Nightblade. It's some tech that I heard about. It isn't anything that I tested with, but in one of my Prism games, if my CNC had been a 9th blade, I would have won that game. So as Enigma rotates out, if you have local Prisms that are going to be at your ProQuest, and you really just want a definitive answer to any Herald that they possibly play, 9th Blade of the Blood Oath is certainly worth considering. So, in summary, we are just adding a little bit more Go Again into our deck, adding a little bit more play against Illusionist, and certainly being more excited about Zap Clappers and Aggro Mirrors, and really just respecting Channel Lightning Valley Sigil of Suffering in the Aurora mirror. So not too many substantial changes. Hopefully nothing that's going to break the bank. I know Command & Conquer is still pretty expensive, but as I said, if you're really more worried about Prism than Enigma, 9th Blade is a pretty cheap card as far as it goes. So play around with the list. We are getting ready for ProQuest Week 1. I'll be attending Battle-Hardened Santa Clara this weekend, so just a really big ProQuest, and excited to put these changes into practice. I'm working on a few other changes as well. I don't want to get too deep into those. I know I will likely be playing against some of you this coming weekend, but more than that, I just don't want to put anything out into the world that I haven't tested yet. So expect another update soon, maybe in the middle of ProQuest season or even at the end of it, but I have some changes to make in a world without Enigma or Zen, and who knows, as ProQuest season shakes out, we might see some other Living Legend Ascensions as well. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. I hope this these changes are something you are excited about, or maybe gives you some ideas about how you would want to change Aurora to suit your own local metas. If so, be sure to zap clap that like button. My comments are always open for any questions or feedback. Let me know if you want me to go into more detail on any of the cards in the list, or you want to know why I'm not playing something that you think is very good in Aurora. I'm happy to discuss it in the comments. Like I said, I have a Discord, a Blue Sky, and a Patreon, links to which are in the video description. I will be back later this week with my full PT London tournament report, lessons learned, bad beats, good plays, etc. So look forward to that. Until the next time I see you on Daily Fab Gameplay, take care.